In March, we celebrate Women's History Month. And this year, we want to honor the women healthcare workers fighting the COVID pandemic. We will tell the stories of a few key pioneers in the medical field from the past 2 centuries, women who overcame prejudice and hardship while making significant advances for humankind. Here is a brief glimpse into the lives of some of these trailblazers. We owe a debt to them and to the women who are fighting for us today.
Marie was born in Warsaw in 1867, and her birth name was Maria Sklodowska. Her parents were teachers, and she had early science lessons from her father. Her mother died from tuberculosis when Marie was 10. Although Marie was an excellent student, in those days a woman couldn't get a degree at the University of Warsaw. So she came to Paris in 1891 and studied at the Sorbonne, where she received her master's degree and where she met Pierre Curie. She replaced him as a professor at the Sorbonne, the first female to hold this position, and received her Doctor of Science. She married Pierre, and although they worked under very poor conditions, they discovered polonium and radium. They both received the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1903. They had 2 daughters, Irene and Eve. Sadly, Pierre was killed in a carriage accident 3 years later. Marie was particularly interested in the medical uses for their discoveries and established the field of radiation for cancer. During World War I, she drove an ambulance to the front, carrying small X-ray boxes known as little Curies, which were used to help doctors locate shrapnel and bullets in wounded soldiers. She also established the field of atomic physics and was awarded a 2nd Nobel Prize. Neither Marie nor Pierre understood the dangers of radium. He was known to carry some around in his pocket to show the glow to friends, and she used it as a nightlight. The effects of radiation finally led to Marie's death in 1934 from aplastic anemia. Marie and Pierre Curie were buried in the Pantheon. She was the first woman to receive this honor. She's been the subject of many poems, films, and biographies. I'd like to read this poem for you now. Marie Curie gives advice to her daughter Irene before her wedding, by Juliana Baggett. I remember this moment. The pram distilled. Its sediment was an infant, no longer something born from me, some ancient homing, not residue, not pitch blend, but its own particle. An open mouth, a cry, within its head a mind wrestling with thoughts. My motherland could be there, driven into the skull. Some ancient homing. Years I've soaked in radium. I've begun to bleed light. I see your father again, crossing streets in rain. His umbrella fills with wind. The horses approach, hauling a wagon of soldiers' uniforms, something to dress the dead. It's come to crush him. My navy suit with solid stitching crushes me. And since then, I've begun to confuse the glowing test tubes with wicks of the moon, a dazzling field of stars, my own soul, and a moment goes by when I forget the brutish charm of work. My hope, daughter, is that what you love doesn't come to kill you. Eye by eye, ear by ear, bone by radiant bone. And finally, a quote from Marie herself. Nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more, so that we may fear less.
Clara Barton, founder of the American Red Cross. Clara Barton was born in Oxford, Massachusetts in 1821 to a prosperous farm family of abolitionists. As a teenager, she nursed her seriously ill brother, but never had any formal medical training. She became a teacher and established the first free school in New Jersey in 1852. Barton worked as a recording clerk at the U.S. Patent Office, but quit her job after the Civil War began because she wanted to aid the Union soldiers. She got permission to transport supplies to the battlefields of Maryland, South Carolina, and Virginia, and became the head nurse for General Benjamin Butler in 1864. She was known to read to the soldiers and write letters for them, and earned the moniker Angel of the Battlefield. After the war, Clara traveled to Europe, and while there learned of the International Red Cross. She returned to the US and on May 21st, 1881, founded the American Association of the Red Cross and was elected president at the age of 60 and continued working there until she was 83. She emphasized the need for emergency preparedness and in 1904 established the National First Aid Association of America. She was an ardent supporter of women's suffrage. Clara Barton died in her home in 1912 at the age of 90. I would like to read a poem written by Barton herself. It's called The Women Who Went to the Field. The women who went to the field, you say. The women who went to the field, and pray, what did they go for? Just to be in the way? What did they know about war anyway? What could they do? What use could they be? They would scream at the sight of a gun, don't you see? And thus it was settled by common consent, by husbands or brothers or whoever went, that the place for the women was in their own homes, there to patiently wait until victory comes. But later it chanced, just how no one knew, that the lines slipped a bit, and some began to crowd through, and they went. Where did they go? Ah, where did they not? Show us the battle, the field, or the spot, where the groans of the wounded rang out on the air, that her ear caught it not, and her hand was not there. Who watched in the tents while the fever fire burned, and the pain-tossing limbs in agony turned, and wet the parched tongue, calmed delirium's strife, till the dying lips murmured, my mother, my wife. And who were they all? There were many, my men. Their record was kept by no tabular pen. A few names were writ, and by chance live today, but's a perishing record fast fading away. And these were the women who went to the war. The women of question, what did they go for? Because in their hearts, God had planted the seed of pity for woe and help for its need. They saw in high purpose a duty to do, and the armor of right broke the barriers through. 'Twas a hampered work, its worth largely lost. 'Twas hindrance and pain, and effort and cost. But through these came knowledge. Knowledge is power. And what would they do if war came again? The Scarlet Cross floats where all was blank then. They would stand with you now as they stood with you then, the nurses, consolers, and saviors of men.
Rebecca Lee Crumpler, the first African-American doctor of medicine in the United States. Born Rebecca Davis in Delaware in 1831, she was raised by her aunt in Pennsylvania, an aunt who cared for all her sick neighbors and who instilled in Rebecca a work ethic and a healing instinct. Rebecca was a brilliant student and later worked with doctors as an apprentice before being accepted into the New England Female Medical College in 1860. She was the first woman of color to be accepted by the college, and she graduated in 1864 with a degree, Doctor of Medicine. Rebecca referred to herself as a doctoress. After her first husband, Wyatt Lee, died, she married Arthur Crumpler, a former slave who had escaped during the Civil War. In 1864, she was practicing medicine in Boston, and in 1865 they moved to Richmond, where Rebecca began working for General Orlando Brown at the Freedmen's Bureau. The Bureau had the responsibility of helping some 4 million slaves transition into free people. Crumpler wanted to learn more about the diseases of women and children. She wrote, "During my stay there, nearly every hour was improved in that sphere of labor. The last quarter of the year 1866, I was enabled to have access every day to a very large number of indigent and others of different classes in a population of over 30,000 colored. Many of the freed slaves were denied medical treatment from the white doctors of the South, and Crumpler herself faced the double obstacles of race and gender. She had difficulty even getting her prescriptions filled. In 1869, Rebecca and Arthur escaped from the extreme prejudices of the South and moved to Beacon Hill in Boston, where she continued her practice. She was known to treat anyone for free if they couldn't afford to pay. In 1883, she wrote, which focused on women and children and on preventative medicine and public health. Rebecca read an original poem at the funeral of Massachusetts Senator Charles Sumner. She died in 1895 in Hyde Park and is buried along with her husband in Fairview Cemetery. She received many honors posthumously. In 2019, the governor of Virginia, Ralph Northam, declared March 30th as Dr. Rebecca Lee Crumpler Day. Her home in Boston on Joy Street is a stop on the Boston Women's Heritage Trail. Maya Angelou would agree that Rebecca Lee Crumpler was a great woman. And here is a stanza from Angelou's poem, When Great Trees Fall. And when great souls die, after a period, peace blooms, slowly and always irregularly. Space is filled with a kind of soothing electric vibration. Our senses restored, never to be the same, whispered to us. They existed. They existed. We can be and be better, for they existed. I leave you with a quote from Dr. Rebecca Lee Crumpler's, "Selfish prudence is too often allowed to come between duty and human life."
Linda Laubenstein was born in Boston in 1947 and grew up in Barrington, Rhode Island. She had a very different obstacle to overcome than any of our other celebrated women. At the age of 5, she contracted a serious case of polio and was in an iron lung for 3 months. She survived, but was a paraplegic and spent the rest of her life in a wheelchair. But Linda was a fighter. She attended Barnard College, majoring in science, and graduated in 1969 at the top of her class. She then went to NYU School of Medicine, specializing in hematology and oncology, graduating in 1973. She worked as a clinical professor before opening her own clinic to focus on AIDS. She treated many young gay men without hesitation, when they were often shunned by others, and co-authored the first paper connecting Kaposi sarcoma, a skin cancer, to AIDS. She went on to become an activist in the AIDS fight and established the Kaposi Sarcoma Research Fund in 1983. The New York State Department of Health created an award recognizing her work, the Linda Laubenstein HIV Clinical Excellence Award. Larry Kramer wrote The Normal Heart in 1984 and created the role of Dr. Emma Bruckner, based on Laubenstein, who had treated his partner. Kramer said he wanted to enshrine her legacy forever. He also wrote of her, Dr. Linda Laubenstein was a great, great person, a supremely gifted physician who was devoted to her patients, all of whom adored her. At one point, she was taking care of more AIDS patients than any other doctor in the entire world, which took a great toll on her health, but did not stop her for a second. She invented or developed the original combination of chemotherapies that are still used to this day. She was beyond brilliant and beyond courageous. I have never known anyone like her, and I hope that my play does her the honor she deserves. Here is a brief excerpt from The Normal Heart, the impassioned words of Emma Bruckner. How can you not fund my research or invite me to participate in yours while something is being passed around that causes death? Women have been discovered to have it in Africa, where it is clearly transmitted heterosexually. It is only a question of time. We could all be dead before you do anything. You want my data? You want my ideas? You want my patients? Take them. Take them! Just do something with them! Sadly, Linda Laubenstein died at the age of 45 at her parents' home. She had suffered for years from the effects of polio, the pandemic which afflicted so many lives until a vaccine was discovered. She was brave and brilliant in the face of extreme adversity.
Florence Nightingale, reformer, nurse, statistician. Florence Nightingale was born in Florence, Italy in 1820, when her wealthy British parents were on an extended honeymoon, thus her name. She was born into a life of privilege and expectations, but at an early age, she developed an interest in the healing arts. Her family was completely against any of Florence's aspirations. She was intended for a suitable marriage to a gentleman of her class. Nursing in those days was not considered a profession for a lady, and Florence decided that she could implement change. At 34, she finally got an opportunity to study in Germany and in France, and upon her return to London in 1853, she became the superintendent of a hospital for gentlewomen. The Crimean War broke out that same year, and Florence wanted to serve in the army hospital there. Because of her social connections and grit, she managed to get a commission to take a group of her trained nurses to Constantinople. When she arrived in Scaglari with 38 women, she found the conditions deplorable. There were shortages of food, beds, linens, and clothing for the wounded, extreme filth. Using her own money and her political connections, Florence took on not only the chaos of the hospital and the hostility of the doctors, but also the whole British Army hospital system. She became known as the Lady with the Lamp because she would walk among the wounded at night carrying her lantern. During her stay in Turkey, Nightingale contracted brucellosis, a highly infectious disease, and she remained an invalid for the rest of her life. But that didn't stop her. She continued to labor for hospital reform and in 1860 established the Nightingale Training School for Nurses. Also during this time, she used her many notes to create the field of data visualization. She was the first female admitted to the Royal Statistical Society, and her book, Notes on Nursing, What It Is and What It Is Not, is still in print today. In spite of her chronic ill health, Nightingale lived to be 90 years old, admired by the public and especially by Queen Victoria. She died at home in London in 1910. There are many poems about Florence Nightingale, the most famous being Santa Filomena by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, but I have chosen to read a woman's tribute. Florence Nightingale by Emma Lazarus. Upon the whitewashed walls, a woman's shadows fall. A woman walketh o'er the darksome floors. A soft angelic smile lighteth her face the while, in passing through the dismal corridors. Her presence in the room of agony and gloom, no fretful murmurs, no coarse words profane. For while she standeth there, all words are hushed save prayer. She seems God's angel weeping o'er man's pain. And some of them arise with eager, tearful eyes from off their couch to see her passing by. Some, e'en too weak for this, can only stoop and kiss her shadow and fall back, content to die. No monument of stone needs this heroic one. Her name is graven on each noble heart, and in all after years, her praise will be the tears which at that name from quivering lids will start. And those who live not now to see the sainted brow and the angelic smile before it flits for eye, they in the future age We'll kiss the storied page whereon the shadow of her life will lie.
Elizabeth Blackwell, the first woman doctor in America. Elizabeth Blackwell was born in Bristol, England in 1821 to a Quaker family. They moved to Cincinnati when she was 11. An intelligent child, she became a teacher along with her mother and 2 sisters when her father died. But Elizabeth, inspired by a dying friend's wish for a female doctor, moved to Pennsylvania and, with the support of the Quaker community, began the long process of gaining admission into medical school. Her acceptance at the Geneva College began her success. She graduated first in her class and then continued her studies in London and Paris. Elizabeth was particularly interested in preventative medicine and the problems of the poor. In 1857, she established a clinic exclusively for indigent women, the New York Infirmary for Women and Children. She worked with her sister, who had also become a doctor. During the Civil War, Blackwell trained nurses for the Union. In 1868, she opened a medical college in New York and left its working to her sister as she returned to London, where she became a professor of gynecology at the London School of Medicine for Women. She also founded the National Health Society. Her autobiography, Pioneer Work in Opening the Medical Profession to Women, was published in 1895. She died in England, May 31st, 1910. Here's the only poem I could find about Elizabeth Blackwell. It's by Eve Merriam. Now, Elizabeth Blackwell, how about you? Seamstress or teacher? Which of the two? You know there's not much else a girl can do. Don't mumble, Elizabeth. Learn to raise your head. I'm not very nimble with a needle or thread. I could teach music if I had to, she said. But I think I'd rather be a doctor instead. Is this some kind of joke? Asked the proper men folk. A woman be a doctor? Not in our respectable day. A doctor? An MD? Did you hear what she said? She's clearly and indubitably out of her head. To medical schools she applied. In vain. And applied again, and again, and again. And one rejection offered this plan. Why not disguise herself as a man? If she pulled back her hair, put on boots and pants, she might attend medical lectures in France. Although she wouldn't earn a degree, they'd let her study anatomy. Elizabeth refused to hide her feminine pride. She drew herself up tall, all 5 feet of her, and tried again, and denied again. The letters answering no mounted like winter snow. Until the day when her ramrod will finally had its way. After the 29th try, there came from Geneva, New York, the reply of a blessed yes. Geneva, Geneva, how sweet the sound. Geneva, Geneva, sweet sanctuary found. And the ladies of Geneva, passing by her in the street, drew back their hoop skirts so they wouldn't have to meet. The perfect happy ending came to pass. Elizabeth graduated at the head of her class. And the ladies of Geneva all rushed forward to now greet that clever, dear Elizabeth. So talented, so sweet. Wasn't it glorious that she'd won the first prize? Elizabeth smiled with cool gray eyes, and she wrapped her shawl against the praise. How soon there might come more chilling days. Turned to leave without hesitating. She was ready now, and the world was waiting. There are many wonderful quotes by Elizabeth Blackwell. I'll just share a couple. None of us can know what we are capable of until we are tested. And on sex. The total deprivation of it produces irritability.